November 5th is going to be called something else. You know, it's going to be called Christian Visibility Day, when Christians turn out in numbers that nobody has ever seen before. Let's call it Christian Visibility Day.
Donald Trump has long courted the votes of America's over 200 million Christians, despite the fact that only 14% of American adults say that the word Christian describes Trump either extremely or very well. He has earned the support of one influential evangelical organization that's worked particularly hard to buoy Trump's ground campaign this cycle. The Faith and Freedom Coalition has already knocked on 3 million doors in battleground states on Trump's behalf and plans to spend more money than ever to mobilize religious voters. Here was Trump speaking to that group in June.
Christians cannot afford to sit on the sidelines. If Joe Biden gets back in, Christianity will not be safe in a nation with no borders, no laws, no freedom, no future. You're not going to be safe. You're not going to be safe as a person, and your religion certainly will be, I think, in tatters. We answer to God in heaven. You're not even allowed to say that anymore. Today, if you say that, they want to arrest you.
Joining us now exclusively is Ralph Reed, the founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. Sir, thank you so much for being on the program. I appreciate you being here.
Sure, Kasie. Good to be with you.
So I'd like to ask you this time around, obviously, when Donald Trump first ran for president in 2016, there was a lot of skepticism from evangelical voters, especially on where he would stand on the issue of abortion, because he had said things in the past when he's, of course, a New Yorker. He had seemed to be pro-choice in some instances. He put out that list of people that he would appoint to the Supreme Court. It seemed to mollify a lot of fears. He obviously put a number of those justices on the court, has since bragged about overturning Roe versus Wade. This time around, though, there's been some back and forth because with the fall of Roe and the return of abortion to becoming a really central issue, especially for Democrats, there have been questions about where Trump stands. For example, would he veto a national abortion ban if he becomes president again? The answer to that seems to be that, yes, he would veto that. Are you comfortable with where he is now? And are evangelical voters still willing to trust him, considering how this specific issue has evolved in recent years?
Well, I think it's a great question, Kasie, and for me personally, I know the president personally. I've talked with him about this issue for years, frankly, and I have no reservations at all. I know that he's pro-life personally. I know that he is the most pro-life president in American history. He defunded Planned Parenthood. He appointed not one, not two, but 3 Supreme Court justices that made it possible for Roe v. Wade to be overturned after over a half century of social struggle on behalf of the pro-life movement and many conservative Bible-believing evangelicals. So I'm very comfortable with where he is. And I would just add one other thing. He's running on a platform that asserts that the unborn child has a right to life that cannot be infringed without due process of law already under the U.S. Constitution, under the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. So he asserts, and the party asserts, that the unborn child is a person who has a right to life and liberty that can't be infringed without due process. That language, in one form or another, has been in the platform since Ronald Reagan in 1984. And in terms of the national abortion law, we certainly favor that, and we would wish that any president would sign it. But the reality is you need 60 votes in the Senate, and that's not likely to happen in the short term. And behind door number 2 is Kamala Harris running on the most radical and extreme pro-abortion agenda of any candidate in history, pledging to pass a law that would codify into federal law not Roe v. Wade, but what would go beyond Roe v. Wade, what would provide taxpayer funding of abortion, elective abortion under Medicaid, for the first time since the Hyde Amendment became law in 1978, and would allow abortion at any stage of pregnancy in all 50 states. It would immediately repeal many of the common sense restrictions on abortion that had been passed in recent decades by the states. So I think for these voters of faith, Kasie, the contrast could not be sharper, could not be more dramatic, and that's why I think they're coming, and they're going to come in record numbers.
What do you hear when former President Trump says, when he talks about abortion, that Republicans have to win elections? What does that say to you?
Look, I think what he's doing is recognizing the political reality. You know, and it reminds me of that very famous Time magazine cover, I think from 1993, as I recall, which was then the anniversary of Roe. And they said, feminists won an historic victory with Roe v. Wade. And the subheadline was, they've been losing ever since. And my concern is that that not be said about our movement in 30 or 40 years. We won a huge victory with Dobbs, but that then led to a counterreaction by the pro-choice and the pro-abortion forces. And we're in a real fight right now. And he's just simply making the point that, look, I gave it back to the states. The court gave it back to the states. That's where it had been throughout American history prior to Roe. That's where it belongs. Family law has historically always been the domain of the states. And, let's not let them mischaracterize our views on this issue. And let's not let them tell lies about our stands. And they're doing that right now in many of these states. It's really, Kasie, the only issue they've got. They can't run on the economy. They can't run on inflation. They can't run on crime. They can't run on immigration or the border. You know, they got one arrow in their quiver, and that's all they're firing. So that's really all he's saying.
Sir, we have a little bit of news from the president. We don't have the video of this quite yet. It was taped in a Fox News town hall yesterday. We're going to be able to see it on the air here in a couple hours or so. Donald Trump called himself, quote, the father of IVF. And he, of course, he goes on to say, we are really the party for IVF. We want fertilization. It's all the way. The Democrats tried to attack us on it, and we're out there on IVF even more than them. Are you comfortable with Donald Trump calling himself the father of IVF? And are you completely morally comfortable with IVF?
I personally am, and our organization is. I mean, obviously, there are moral and ethical concerns when you're fertilizing embryos, when you're dealing with a fertility situation, in terms of how many are fertilized and how they're dealt with. Are they discarded? Is it done willy-nilly? Is there no concern at all for moral, ethical, and religious concerns? I think we can work through those issues. But Kasie, we're pro-life. And this is about couples that are struggling to have a child, to bring a life into the world. I don't see how we could say we're pro-life and say that we don't want to help struggling couples have children. We want more people to bring lives, unborn children, to fruition and to life. And so I don't have any issue with it at all.
All right. Ralph Reed for us this morning. Sir, grateful to have your perspective on the program. Thanks very much for coming by.
You bet. Good to be with you.
All right. Still to come here on